Chapter 11. Update. So what's really happening? A hypothesis. Since the early editions of this book, I have been contacted by numerous people asking me to explain some of the finer details about what might be actually occurring during these pseudo-abduction experiences. Many have come to the conclusion that the episodes are spiritual in nature, that is, they are emanating from the deceptive practices of spiritual angelic beings from another dimension. Often when one thinks spiritual, it gives the impression that these angelic beings are just some sort of ethereal or ghostly entities. However, as we showed earlier in the book, angels are recorded as appearing physically, i.e., manifesting in physical form with physical bodies and have physically affected human beings. Similarly, there are both spiritual, supernatural, and physical aspects to these alien encounters. The problem is that some of the more bizarre details of the alleged physical aspects remain difficult to explain. That is, they are most unlikely to be really occurring at a physical level. They include, are people really passing through walls to travel towards a spaceship? Do they really undergo medical procedures while on board? Are people really having sexual encounters with these entities, and so on? Such questions may indeed be ultimately unanswerable this side of eternity until believers are in the presence of the source of all truth, the Lord Jesus Christ. As mentioned earlier, we currently do not have the ability to visit the spiritual dimension to conduct tests to verify same. We only have the accounts of people who claim to have undergone such experiences. The classic abduction syndrome, as described in Chapter 7, is used by most serious researchers as a set of markers or parameters to define an actual abduction experience as opposed to a dream, hallucination, or psychological episode. The classic abduction syndrome was developed without a Christian perspective of the phenomenon in mind, and it simply attempts to deal with the commonalities of experiences of alleged abductees. Nonetheless, I have found it to be both accurate and useful when meeting, talking to, and even counseling those who claim alien experiences. For the purposes of understanding this new section update in the book, it may be necessary to revisit chapters 7 and 8. The alien agenda of these fallen entities was aptly described by Dr. David Jacobs earlier when he described it as a clandestine program of physiological exploitation by one species of another. Because these aliens act in such a deceptive manner and are not who they claim to be, it is reasonable to deduce that it is their very nature to be deceitful. As such, there is no sound reason to interpret much of what is claimed, shown, or being represented by them as being truthful, especially with regard to the tall tales that they tell their victims. This is because we have also demonstrated that their deceptions seem to be centered on destroying every major tenet of the Bible and the divine personhood of Jesus Christ. Such deceptive fruit is in keeping with predictions made in the Bible. That is, there is a master plan by the enemies of the Creator God to deceive people away from the truth of the Bible and their need for salvation through the atoning work of Jesus Christ. For us mortal beings, it's hard to imagine or even visualize a war that is occurring in the upper echelons of the spiritual realm between immensely powerful beings known as angels. Because human beings are the focus of this war, it therefore overlaps into our physical dimensions, and because of the players and the high stakes involved, we should not be surprised at the lengths to which such beings will go for the purposes of deceiving and leading away those who are made in the image of their Creator God. This would necessitate constructing some physical aspects to the deceptions because human beings live and operate in a physical three-dimensional universe. There are clearly some physical aspects of the phenomenon, like UFOs being seen on radar, electromagnetic disturbances, markings on the ground or in ice, physical markings left on victims, etc. However, I believe that while some aspects about UFOs can be physically real, the appearance of them being complex spaceships with sophisticated inner workings is illusory in nature. Similarly, so are the descriptions of aliens and their victims being beamed through walls or ceilings and the detailed accounts of experiences aboard some kind of spacecraft. In short, although initial sightings may be real and strange entities may appear in one's room, the elaborations I just mentioned did not actually occur. To those who have experienced such events, these statements may cause angst, and you may think that the comments are based upon ignorance. Or you might be thinking, he doesn't know what he's talking about because I know what really happened to me. I experienced it and it was real. But please read on and keep in mind that I am not denying the experience or encounter. In one sense, the more extreme the claims, the more they somehow lend credibility to the notion that they may really be occurring at the hands of some technologically advanced race of aliens from another planet. Many think, how or why would people fabricate such bizarre details unless there was some truth to them? Indeed, there may be some truth in that the episode in the general sense may be real. However, there are simply too many physics-denying anomalies occurring for these abductions to be simply taken at face value based on the description by victims. The explanation to come may sound like an anomaly in itself, but bear in mind that the update to this book is the result of what are now many years of experience in dealing with this phenomenon and its victims. The facts are, there are significant numbers of the population experiencing such events. There are often multiple experiencers to some events. The victims of abductions recount striking similarities to their experiences. All seemingly add to the weight of evidence that these are real intrusions by extraterrestrials. For instance, and as described by the classic abduction syndrome, how could they all similarly recall such detailed descriptions of the inside of a ship, medical examinations, similar descriptions of alien beings, video screens aboard the ship and so on, unless it all really happened just as visualized? The Allagash Four. In August 1976, 4 male friends fishing in a canoe on the Allagash Waterway in northern Maine, USA, saw a craft of coloured lights that hovered nearby. After one of the men shone his flashlight at it, the craft initially stopped and then started to move towards the canoe while emitting a circular hollow light upon the water. The terrified men frantically paddled towards the shore, but the light eventually enveloped them as they reached the shore. Although they have different accounts at this stage about how they got onto the bank, they all recalled that the fire they had lit earlier had completely burnt down to a few coals, meaning that several hours had elapsed. They could not account for that missing time. To them, it seemed like only about 15 minutes from when they first saw the object to when they were standing on the bank. As they looked up at the light, it now shone upwards, and then the lights moved away at terrific speed. Over the next few years, the men suffered night terrors which included seeing strange creatures, undergoing sleep paralysis and levitation from their beds, and recollection and sensation of experimentation by strange entities being done upon them. Upon the advice of their doctor, they sought help from UFO experts. This led them to MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, and hypnosis sessions to regress the men in an attempt to find out what happened during the period of missing time. Under hypnosis, all 4 witnesses relived detailed and traumatic UFO abduction experiences during the period of missing time. All said they were transferred from their canoe into the UFO by the hollow tube-like beam of light. On board, they encountered strange humanoid creatures that exerted some kind of mind control over them so that they could not resist their demands. All were made to undress and sit on a plastic-like bench in an area illuminated by diffuse white light. After looking at their eyes and in their mouths with a pencil-sized rod with a light on its tip, the aliens placed them in a harness and flexed their arms and legs. Then, one by one, they were made to lie on a table where each was examined by a number of strange handheld and larger machine-like instruments that were lowered over their bodies. During this segment of the examination, the alien entities removed samples of saliva, skin scrapings, blood, feces, urine and sperm from each of the abductees. Because all 4 men, while under hypnosis, recounted identical memories of the event, this case has been cited as one of the most compelling abduction accounts in history. Indeed, it was studying these multiple experiencer-type events and their multiple confirmed stories that actually provided clues to unraveling the seeming weight of evidence for the belief that these were real alien abduction accounts, rather than being the death knell for a spiritual explanation. As we mentioned earlier, and as in the aforementioned case, hypnosis is and was used to regress or take people back under the belief that the subconscious mind recalls everything in one's past. We previously detailed some of the problems with this method of investigation, and we will discuss these more and in depth later. Hypnosis has been mainly used as a post-event investigative method, but the problems with the use of hypnosis commence earlier in the timeline of the experience. It is my belief that hypnotic methods are actually being used to perpetrate the experience upon the hapless victims in the first place. This seems consistent with the pattern one sees, namely that hypnosis is often required post-experience, and therefore it is necessary to enter the subconscious mind to unlock such seeming experiences, because the majority of experiencers have no conscious recollection of events. Therefore, it seems reasonable to presume that such experiences have only been recorded in the subconscious mind. It seems amazing to me that such a major clue should be willingly ignored by ufologists keen to defend their experiences of aliens as having really, physically taken place. It is explained away on the basis that the aliens invoke a trance-like state to encourage the victim to forget about the experience. But if so, and it is thus agreed that the alleged aliens are able to induce a hypnotic state, why is it not also obvious that much of what supposedly occurred may have been planted in the subconscious mind during that same subliminal state? After all, it can only be recalled and brought to the surface by triggering that same state once again. An alien abduction movie called The Fourth Kind portrayed with reasonable accuracy how the hypnotic regression method is used. The Fourth Kind, 2009. A flood of movie pre-hype advertising outlined the movie's main premise, and the marketing message was very clear. We are presenting a docudrama based upon real events, real case studies, and real archival footage to demonstrate that people really are being abducted by aliens. However, that particular claim was not really validated. What was clear is that the trailer's claims were a tad deceptive, as no real footage of people being abducted by any entity whatsoever was shown. At the onset of the movie, the lead actress Milla Jovovich, who had previously starred in science fiction and horror movies like The Fifth Element and Resident Evil, appeared on screen playing herself. She stated that although she would be playing the part of real-life psychologist Dr. Abigail Emily Tyler, the movie would be interspersed with real footage of interviews with patients and police video of events that besieged the small Alaskan town of Nome. Such statements were clearly intended to lead the viewers along the path of belief that the producers wanted them to tread. Next, we see the alleged real Tyler undergoing hypnotic regression at the hands of a fellow psychiatrist. The screen then divides with actress Jovovich on one half accurately reenacting the same scene at the same time and word for word. This was the pattern throughout most of the movie. This was a very clever ploy by the movie's makers because on the occasions when Jovovich was not sharing the screen with footage of Tyler, it gave the viewer the impression that every last detail of the script was based upon factual occurrences. To avoid confusion as I go forward, if I mention a single person's name, such as Jovovich or Tyler, it means that the person was appearing alone on the screen. But if I say Jovovich Tyler or Tyler Jovovich together, it means that the screen was split between alleged real footage of Tyler, or events recorded by her, and the actress Jovovich playing her, or even switching back and forth between the two. Tyler's Jovovich's regression is an attempt to relive the night surrounding her husband's death, which she believes was at the hands of a murderer. However, during such therapy she is always unable to see the face of the killer. The death of her husband has caused unresolved trauma not only in her own life, but the lives of her teenage son and young daughter. Afterwards, Jovovich returns to her own clinical practice in Nome, and we see Tyler Jovovich interviewing a succession of patients who are all suffering the same sleep terrors. They are unable to consciously recall what is actually occurring to them with the exception of a common image, that of a white owl appearing at their window. The white owl was synonymous with Whitley Strieber's abductions. Tyler Jovovich regresses one of the patients who, while under hypnosis, relives a terrifying ordeal, so disturbing that he doesn't wish to share the details with even his own counselor. Later that evening, we witness the same patient murdering his own wife and children, reenacted and with allegedly real police footage which created a disturbing sense of realism, because he wants to spare them from undergoing the same horrific experiences he had. Hypnotic regression. The continued regression of the inhabitants of Nome reveals that they believe they are being visited by entities in the middle of the night, and that such entities are performing grotesque experiments on them. It is during this splicing of footage and reenactments that we see the alleged transmogrification of people into contorted shapes as they scream with ear-piercing terror. I've seen several regressions of alleged abductees, and they do suffer induced traumatization as a result of the regression. This is because they are reliving an experience that they really do believe was an alien abduction. But to date, as a researcher of this phenomenon, I have never seen or read of any accounts where a patient victim while under regression levitates or has their body twisted violently and bones broken as portrayed in the movie. Although it was the producer's intention to have us believe that residents of Nome were undergoing alien abductions, the types of incidents that occurred during the alleged regression of patients in this movie actually reveals otherwise. When people recount the details of their experiences, and even the ones portrayed in this movie, it is clear that they represent spiritual experiences. It really looked like it. The attacks seemed to be inflicted by non-visible beings. The alleged footage of the regression of abductees was extremely similar to demonic possession and reminiscent of the incident in Mark 9:17-26, when Jesus healed a young boy who was possessed by an evil spirit. On exorcising the spirit, we are told that the spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said, "He's dead." The movie also takes potshots at the Christian faith. It shows Jovovich praying with her children before a meal, but later, when trying to understand the reason for the awful events in her life, she looks up and asks God, why? She discovers that her husband was also trying to unravel the Nome mystery, and she stumbles across a book about ancient Sumerian clay tablets. She enlists the help of the author of the book, and he discovers from an audio recording of one of the abductions that the entities speak this ancient Sumerian language. He also claims that the tablet's creation account predates the Bible's Genesis account of creation, and that its account of Noah's flood was taken originally from these same tablets. This false analogy comes straight out of the writings of famous UFO believer Zacharias Sitchin, a self-proclaimed expert on these tablets, who claims that human beings' creators are aliens known in these Sumerian texts as the Anunnaki, which the Bible records as Anakim. See Chapter 6. Movies and other media are a powerful influence on us. See Chapter 1. Many people don't realize that when we watch such information, we are actually giving permission for the teller of the tale to tell us their story and even their version of the truth. It's a bit like saying, "Okay, so tell me your story. I'm here because I want to hear it." It makes one inclined to believe what one is being told. The truth about the movie. The following facts were discovered about this truthful docudrama. There was no rash of alleged alien abductions in Nome, Alaska. There was a spate of disappearances of individuals. Most cases were solved, and the FBI concluded that it was not the work of a serial killer, but the combination of being a town with high alcohol consumption and very cold winters. One can read the official report in the Anchorage Daily News Online. Dr. Abigail Tyler is a fictitious person. There is no record of her having worked in Nome, Alaska. The producers never provided any evidence to support their claims of real cases, archival footage, etc. Statements by officials in Nome denied any such occurrences as depicted in the movie ever took place. The movie claims to have changed the names of the characters, including the police officers involved, for their own protection, and at the end of the movie it states that these persons declined to be interviewed or take part in the movie. This is very convenient because it prohibits anyone from checking on the validity of the alleged events or event interviews. It also adds to the conspiratorial notions that silence means culpability. Supposed news-type websites suddenly appeared on the internet claiming to authenticate the premise and the characters in the movie, and particularly the person of Abigail Tyler. Some researchers have discovered that many of these sites were constructed in a matter of weeks and just before the movie's publicity started to roll off the line. It appears that the movie is a complete work of fiction, although drawing to an extent from abduction folklore. The method of claiming that the realistic, almost home movie-style footage of interviews is genuine is very similar to the tactics used in movies such as The Blair Witch Project and the Alien Autopsy documentary. See Chapter 6. The climax of the movie reveals that Tyler Jovovich herself is an abductee. During one experience, her young daughter is also abducted by aliens and never returned. While undergoing regression to retrace the event, she relives an awful abduction experience that reveals further details about what is really happening. But the regression permanently damages Tyler Jovovich physically and emotionally, who was subsequently told that her husband was not murdered but committed suicide, likely due to the similar experiences he appeared to have suffered. Apparently, Tyler Jovovich knew this all along, but had blocked it from her subconscious because it was simply too painful to deal with. We are told that she is insane, and thus this leaves the viewer with some doubt that any of what occurred to her was real. The final scenes are played out with a wheelchair-bound Tyler being interviewed by the movie's real-life screenplay writer and director at Chapman University, a real university, but like in some of the points before, they have denied ever conducting such interviews or even knowing Tyler. The portrayal of the scarred Tyler is harrowing, though. Although this may be a fictional account, the reality of such seriously damaged people is only too evident to those involved in abduction research. It is the real evidence of altered and broken lives that is only too recognizable as the fruit of the evil one using such deceptive and destructive practices to spite his creator and turn the very subjects that God loves away from him. Sadly, this fact is often lost on secular researchers. Amazingly, the last scene with Tyler is extremely revealing. Her interviewer asks, "You said they claim to be God." One entity was recorded saying these words in the movie. Tyler responds and says, "No, they pretend to be." The aforementioned movie implied what many who have studied the phenomenon believe, namely that people are being possessed by aliens which have entered bedrooms through the ceilings or walls and that the abductees left via the same method. However, such actions defy the very laws of physics. In addition, we are shown that the experiencers are supposed to have painful drills and probes inserted into them, yet they mostly show no signs of having had such procedures. The richness of the details, but the lack of a naturalistic explanation, has baffled researchers for years. The movie's producers, and indeed the majority of the world's UFO researchers, defer to some unknown advanced technology or force that aliens must possess because they are older and smarter on the evolutionary scale. This is because such people have not discerned the spiritual nature of the phenomenon. All this once again demonstrates how one's view of origins will shape the way one interprets all evidence. Everything from fossils in the ground to distant starlight and even the strange occultic-type experiences that people are having in their bedrooms. False memory syndrome. Of course, there is much debate, even in the Christian community, about hypnosis and whether the practice itself is safe for both the physical and spiritual well-being of the patient. It is well known that past events can indeed be unlocked by such practices. But a major problem is that the hypnotist cannot know for sure if actual historical events are being recalled. This is because it is also now well known that one's mind or imagination can create false memories, and that these can also be implanted by the hypnotist, even the one doing the regression, sometimes unintentionally. This is not a blanket statement to say that all hypnotically recalled memories are false. But if professional researchers now recognize that false memories exist and can be brought to the surface, then how can we discern between the two? Children who naturally have fertile imaginations are adept at this, of course, but unresolved trauma in one's life can also create alternate imagined scenarios that one might eventually believe to be true. Sometimes this is done to protect oneself from the emotional pain of the past. Once such past events are recalled, often there can ensue a kind of self-reinforcement and self-delusion. Most people do this anyway to some extent during their normal waking lives. Stories of the past get added to and then repeated often enough until they become truth in a person's life. False memory syndrome is defined as a condition in which a person's identity and interpersonal relationships are centered around a memory of traumatic experience which is objectively false, but in which the person strongly believes. Note that the syndrome is not characterized by false memories as such. We all have memories that are inaccurate. Rather, the syndrome may be diagnosed when the memory is so deeply ingrained that it orients the individual's entire personality and lifestyle, in turn disrupting all sorts of other adaptive behavior. False memory syndrome is especially destructive because the person assiduously avoids confrontation with any evidence that might challenge the memory. Thus, it takes on a life of its own, encapsulated and resistant to correction. The person may become so focused on memory that he or she may be effectively distracted from coping with the real problems in his or her life. Similarly, human memory is created and highly suggestible, and a wide variety of innocuous, embarrassing, and frightening memories can be falsely created through the use of different techniques, including guided imagery, hypnosis, and suggestion by others. Though not all individuals who are exposed to these techniques will develop memories, experiments suggest a significant number of people will, and will actively defend the existence of the events even if told they were false and deliberately implanted. The aforementioned definitions indicate how real the memory can become in a person's life. This gives some indication as to why the alien abduction syndrome has reached epidemic proportions. Human nature reinforces the illusion because people do not like to be told, nor do they like to admit that they have been deceived. As part of the implantation of false memories, the experiencers are often told that they have been selected and are special. This can create meaning and purpose in one's life, particularly in the absence of some other guiding religious belief. Challenging such views can also add to the isolation created by the experience, and in some ways can seem to be challenging the person's sense of well-being and personal identity. The isolation can make them become dependent on the experience, which is often why there are ongoing experiences, like Stockholm Syndrome, where victims of real hostage situations have become emotionally dependent upon their captors. This is why it is incredibly difficult to reach people and convey to them the reality that such experiences might well have been deceptive. The following are some extracts from the website of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. What are false memories? Because of the reconstructive nature of memory, some memories may be distorted through influences such as the incorporation of new information. There are also believed-in imaginings that are not based in historical reality. These have been called false memories, pseudo-memories, and memory illusions. They can result from the influence of external factors, such as the opinion of an authority figure or information repeated in a culture. An individual with an internal desire to please, to get better, or to conform can easily be affected by such influences. Some of our memories are true, some are a mixture of fact and fantasy, and some are false. Whether those memories seem to be continuous or seem to be recalled after a time of being forgotten or not thought about. Then how can we know if our memories are true? The professional organizations agree. The only way to distinguish between true and false memories is by external corroboration. In addition, many professionals and organizations have commented on false memory syndrome. The Royal College of Psychiatrists in 1997 says memories, however emotionally intense and significant to the individual, do not necessarily reflect factual events. Elizabeth Loftus in Memory Faults and Fixes, Issues in Science and Technology, Summer 2002, says, psychological studies have shown that it is virtually impossible to tell the difference between a real memory and one that is a product of imagination or some other process. For a very tragic example of the reality of people suffering from false memory syndrome, one needs to look no further than the devastation caused to families as a result of encouraging these memories. There are now literally hundreds of cases where people seeking counseling or help from therapists for issues in their adult lives were told that the problems probably stemmed from sexual abuse in their childhood. Many therapy sessions later, and once the seed had been planted, the patients recovered non-existent memories of fathers, mothers, uncles, and so on abusing them, most interestingly with graphic details of each alleged event. Lawsuits among family members abounded, and because of bad therapeutic practices and the ill-conceived ideas that such issues needed to be brought to the surface to be confronted, families, relationships, and lives have been ripped apart. There are many case studies that can be read on the False Memory Syndrome Foundation website. A lady who was told she was suffering from multiple personality disorder wrote the following. The doctor decided I needed 5 to 7 years of therapy. He explained to me and my husband, so terrible that she repressed these memories deep in her mind. Finally, she will work through these old feelings and get better. We bought it, and I worked hard to recall repressed memories. Of course, there were no real memories, but the mind is an amazing thing. Let me explain in lay terms how repressed memories were created on one occasion. The therapist called up Beth, a 5-year-old alter ego, other personality, and hypnotized her. He suggested sexual abuse had occurred at the hands of her daddy. He explained she needed to see a big movie screen in her mind and tell him what she saw. Then he asked leading questions about touching, etc. Beth performed just as the therapist predicted she would. Beth and I were rewarded with much attention and sympathy. In reality, I didn't have those memories, but the doctor considered them true and wanted more. For months, I allowed other alters to write anything they could remember. The memories grew worse and worse, and I became horrified. I thought it was all true, and I felt worthless and betrayed. I recalled various fragments of movies, books, talk shows, and nightly news, and soon I had plenty of child abuse memories. But it didn't stop there. Eventually, I said I had taken part in satanic rituals, been buried alive, drank blood, and helped to kill a baby. With every new memory, my therapist was intrigued and building a case to prove he was right about me all along. I was rewarded with his attention to me and was his best patient. But I started to have feelings of death and became suicidal. I truly exhibited all the multiple personality disorder symptoms, even though I had learned them. Control of my mind, emotions, and will was given to the personalities the therapist had empowered. In the aforementioned story, if we substituted the patient for an alien abductee and the therapist for a hypnotist from a UFO organization or even a deceiving angel, the story sounds awfully familiar. The problems with regression. To avoid offense, I want to reassert that this is not meant to diminish the real experiences of people who have suffered trauma or abuse in the past from whatever source. I can empathize with the frustration of not being able to find closure or even share such experiences with others. This is a very difficult area to discern because, as we mentioned earlier, a major problem is that even the hypnotists themselves can, either intentionally or inadvertently, through suggestion, create an imaginary scenario or event in a patient's mind. Once the suggestion is planted, the imagination and the mind can do the rest. Professional hypnotists and even con artists can hypnotize people for entertainment's sake with relative ease. The usual waving of a fob watch or look into my eyes that accompanied many TV performances of the past is actually not necessary, although such methods do work. This is frequently described as stage hypnosis. It's often a form of traditional hypnosis with the added stage pizzazz, where suggestions are made to the unconscious or subconscious mind, and researchers claim that both are actually the same thing. A key to understanding how this works and being able to perform traditional hypnosis is to realize that people were there to be entertained in the first place. In short, they were already open to being hypnotized. Or they may be visiting a physician, a clinical hypnotherapist, or a UFO researcher and thus allow themselves to be helped through hypnosis. Throughout this book, I have pointed out repeatedly that a pre-belief seems to be one of the prerequisites in order to be deceived. This may be as simple as being open to the possibility of extraterrestrial life. So that if you think such beings have actually appeared before you, then you are more likely to be taken in by it. And because polls consistently show that the majority of the population now believes in the possibility of ET life, it would indicate that vast numbers are increasingly more vulnerable to deception through hypnotic suggestion and false memory implantation by fallen angels masquerading as aliens. Most people misunderstand hypnosis and wrongly believe that they cannot be hypnotized if they don't want to be. But there are actually many forms or types of hypnosis. The hypnotic state is really more the result of a self-hypnosis that is induced by the hypnotist who talks you into it. One form requires the patient or victim to fall into a relaxed state. In other cases, creating disorientation or confusion works to the hypnotizer's advantage. Dr. Al Krasner was the founder and director of the American Institute of Hypnotherapy. In his book, The Wizard Within, he is quoted as saying, "I believe hypnosis to be a process which produces relaxation, distraction of the conscious mind, heightened suggestibility, and increased awareness, allowing access to the subconscious mind through the imagination. It also produces the ability to experience thoughts and images as real." However, there are other forms of hypnosis, such as neuro-linguistic programming, normally referred to as NLP, and Ericksonian hypnotherapy, which uses stories and metaphors to create indirect suggestions. Dr. Milton H. Erickson is quoted as saying, "The hypnotic state is an experience that belongs to the subject, derives from the subject's own accumulated learnings and memories, not necessarily consciously recognized, but possible of manifestations in a special state of non-waking awareness." There are also instant inductions. We'll talk about that later. Is hypnosis always wrong? Many people are wary, even fearful of hypnosis. Much of this may be a result of lack of understanding of what is involved and/or assigning unwarranted spiritual implications to it. Some even think that practitioners are engaging in occult practices and are the equivalent of the charmers and enchanters forbidden in the Old Testament. I've tried to show that hypnosis taps into mechanisms that are part of our normal brain in this fallen world. Most hypnosis does not involve any attempt to invoke the supernatural. Of course, like many things in our world, in the wrong hands it can be used for dangerous and destructive purposes. One case in point is abduction scenarios. Even exploiting people under hypnosis for entertainment purposes seems opposed to the fact that our dominion mandate does not extend to dominion over other human beings made in God's image. But to write off all hypnosis as a cult seems hard to justify biblically. Hypnosis can be a useful tool in the right hands and used in a proper forum or setting, for instance, to anesthetize a person who needs surgery but is unable to tolerate a standard anesthetic. Because hypnosis is rarely undertaken or understood in Christian circles, it is mainly employed by secular practitioners, particularly in the field of psychology. Christians therefore might have cause for concern in this regard due to many psychologists having pre-existing secular and even evolutionary interpretations of the phenomena, as in the cases mentioned before. They do not understand it as part of the relationship between body, soul, and spirit in God's design of mankind, broken to some extent at the time of the fall. Once this relaxed state is reached and the focus is on the hypnotizer, he can instruct, make recommendations using open or subliminal communication, even with touch or gestures, to reinforce positive or negative aspects that are being assigned to memory in order to get the patient to do whatever the hypnotizer wants. At the time of the session, this may be done intentionally, the way fallen angels can, inadvertently by the hypnotist, or even by the surroundings or setting that accompanies the session. This idea that hypnosis can achieve so much may seem too simplistic or too amazing for some listening to this, but a little realistic research will reveal this to be the truth. And as with many aspects to this phenomenon, I have often found the simplest explanations to be the best. The reason they are not often believed and accepted is due to the overlay of misinformation by those desiring strange phenomena to be real aliens. See Chapter 6. With subliminal suggestion, it is not always necessary for a person to be hypnotized. I've seen experiments where visitors to shopping malls were subject to subliminal words or commands played over the public broadcast system, along with the usual piped music one can usually hear in such venues. In each and every case, the overall majority of the shoppers obeyed commands when instructed that they were not even aware had been conveyed to them. A well-known British hypnotist by the name of Darren Brown regularly creates a whole range of different scenarios for his television program to show how people are easily suggestible and can be manipulated. In one episode, prior to a meeting with famous British celebrity Simon Pegg, and all filmed under the camera's glare, the celebrity was asked to secretly write on a sealed card his all-time favourite gift, i.e. the one gift he always wanted to receive. No one else was privy to what he had written down. After 10 minutes of conversation with Brown, he stated that he always wanted a red bicycle. However, when he was invited to open the sealed card, it revealed that he had earlier written down a leather jacket. He was confused and disoriented as to how this could occur. Brown revealed how he achieved this by lacing and overlaying the conversation with stories that provided commonalities between the past and present and included words like red, handlebar, wheels, and bicycle. Also, when one took a closer look at the room the interview was conducted in, it also contained many items and colours to aid in the planting of a false memory. You can watch a replay of the interview to see this. But the key was this: in order to get the celebrity to change his choice of a favourite gift, Brown had to create a false memory in the person. Brown often comments that in such scenarios his victims really have no choice in the matter, because he stacks the odds so much in his favour by inserting so much subliminal information. This indicates what power these methods can have. In short, the real memory of writing down a leather jacket was replaced or manipulated. What seems more amazing is that before Pegg opened the card, he had created and explained a whole imaginary scenario about being deprived in his childhood of a bicycle to explain his choice of a red bicycle. No wonder he was confused and disoriented when he opened his own card. This aptly demonstrates how once the message, memory, or image is implanted, the imagination can fill in the blanks. When the false memory is created, it is effectively a false history, and as such the mind can create a whole array of visual imagery to support the new memory. This shows how a form of self-delusion or self-reinforcement about the imagined event can actually occur. The methods that professional hypnotists like Brown use are the neuro-linguistic programming and Ericksonian methods referred to earlier. The stories they tell contain process instructions or embedded commands hidden in the stories. Sometimes NLP anchoring is used, where triggers or memories of the past are used to associate new memories or even to disassociate other memories. An acquaintance of mine, let's call him Eric, a medical doctor, also revealed that while a student on call at a maternity hospital, card games were often played by the students to pass the time. During one session, the subject of hypnosis came up in discussion. Eric had studied psychology and explained to one of his fellow medical students that it was possible to hypnotize him and get him to carry out post-hypnotic suggestions. The student, let's call him Bill, strongly scoffed at the whole idea that he would even go under, but agreed to play along. Eric very quickly managed to get him into a trance state. He then said that after waking, after being given a cue word, Bill would hurl an empty can of sliced pineapple that was sitting on the window ledge out of the first floor window, but he would forget having been given the command while under. Given that there were parked cars below, this was something Bill would not normally have dreamt of doing. After being woken from the trance, Bill confidently claimed that he had not been hypnotized and was just playing along. But he offered no recollection of the suggestion about the pineapple can. Then Eric uttered the cue word, the so-called trigger. Bill immediately became restless, glancing over at the hapless can repeatedly. Finally, he got up and started to move towards the can, muttering all the while about how shoddy it looked, how it irritated him, and so on. When he had inched close enough, he picked it up, continuing to denigrate the poor can. Maintaining his invective, he moved gradually closer to the open window while seeming to avoid the appearance of doing so purposely. When he was up close, he said he'd had enough. The can irked him so much that he didn't want to see it anymore, and stepping up to the open window, he hurled it out into the outer darkness. It was as if, once the implanted idea was awoken by the key word, the impulse to do this rather irrational thing had to be rationalized somehow. The mind creating a cover story, as it were, which involved the can's unworthiness to share the same room with him. The cover story or rationale had to paint the can as sufficiently repugnant to warrant not merely being placed in the trash, but thrown out the window. Afterwards, he seemed somewhat dazed and confused, as if wrestling with the thought, why did I do that? There were subsequent instances, too, in which Eric's post-hypnotic suggestions to Bill demonstrated even more clearly how Bill's mind was creating additional realities, a cover or justification for an impulse to certain behavior. The impulse generated from an idea that had already been implanted previously. Nothing new under the sun. The Bible indicates that the wisest man ever to live was the Israelite King Solomon. In Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verses 9 and 10, he said, "What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new? It was here already, long ago. It was here before our time." Hypnosis is actually just a label that has been applied to a very broad, imperfectly understood set of mind phenomena. However, the phenomenon of hypnosis is not new. When it comes to deceiving mankind, fallen angels do not need to reinvent the wheel, and the Bible also indicates that man is only ever tempted by what is common to him. 1 Corinthians 10:13. When it comes to trying to unravel abduction episodes, there are many hypotheses percolating among the UFO community, with most resorting to unknown forces and even bizarre spiritual explanations to explain what we cannot be sure is actually occurring anyway. None of these elegant hypotheses have any experimental or empirical basis to them, and often no scriptural support either. There is a distinct lack of physical evidence in these episodes, and there are rarely any non-abductee eyewitnesses to abduction events, for example. Even if there were people who claimed to have seen what happened, this hypothesis could explain why they, too, believed something they saw. While my own hypnosis theory is hypothetical, it appeals to mechanisms we know exist, to things we know can actually be done via hypnosis. In mentioning some of these experiences earlier, and there are more to come, I'm pointing out that hypnosis is a known quantity that can be used to explain what is occurring during alleged alien abductions. Using the Occam's razor approach, see Chapter 4, I'm suggesting that many of the details of abduction episodes are an illusory spiritual deception that is being planted into the minds of experiencers to create the reality, a false memory in effect. This not only fits the instances where individuals are concerned, in the case of the Allagash 4 too, the hypnosis theory fits the circumstances perfectly. Mass hypnosis episodes can also occur, and subliminal messages can be imposed on entire groups as shown earlier in the description of the shopping mall experiments. So, how can the appearance of a UFO in the sky lead to missing time and a recollection of being abducted by an alien? Firstly, as we have shown, UFOs have changed their shapes over the years. They seem able to morph into a form that is culturally acceptable to the victim. This can help to create an openness to further suggestion. In the past, UFOs appeared as flying canoes, and today they appear as spaceships, which automatically evokes the idea that they are piloted by extraterrestrial spacemen, and thus creates the opening for the alien abduction scenario. Jacques Vallée showed that the abductors have morphed over the years too, anything from fairies and elves to ETs, whatever seems culturally acceptable to the population. Hypnotherapy is almost always done with relaxation and relatively gradual induction with a soft, soothing voice, but these are not even necessary with about 20% of the population or well-prepared subjects. Modern hypnotists also use lights and sounds to stimulate people to make them susceptible to suggestion. This is a characteristic also often used in sightings prior to abductions. Hypnotists can paralyze people even when the patient is fully conscious. A clinical hypnotherapist confirmed to me, sleeping people do not usually transition into hypnosis and are not subliminally suggestible. But waking up from an REM stage with shock and surprise would provide the perfect brainwave transition to induce an immediate deep state in suggestible subjects. This was a common device in brainwashing techniques, though usually with brutal shock and confusion. The gently repeated soothing whispers "you're all right" or something similar would have less trauma, but should be very effective in leaving a trigger imprint in the subject's spirit that could be harnessed at a later time. This method of waking people occurs commonly in alien abduction scenarios. Similarly, when entities appear in a room, many claim that they feel compelled to look into the entity's eyes, another method used by hypnotists. Once they are in this controlled state, they are very prone to further suggestion. The idea that the entities communicate telepathically is also a common belief, something that fits no known scientific observations. But this could easily be believed if messages to that effect were being placed while under hypnosis. There is also another pattern amongst abductees that I have discovered alongside of any pre-belief or openness to the idea of ETs, and it is that there seems to be an additional entry point, so to speak. People who have unresolved trauma or issues in their past seem to be particularly vulnerable to alien abductions and false memory syndrome in general. This is something recognized by many medical experts operating outside of the ufological area. In addition, those suffering from current problems such as alcoholism or drug addiction also seem to be susceptible. I have seen on occasions where people suffering with mental disabilities have had similar experiences as identified using the classic abduction syndrome categorization. Unfortunately, when these people talk about their experiences, they are largely ignored and the claims are passed off as the fruit of their illnesses. Of course, no amount of personal frailty can by itself explain such things as the seemingly shared experiences of the Allagash 4, for example. It seems that the master deceiver and enemy of God, the devil, or Lucifer, or Satan, and his cohorts, other fallen angels, are no respecter of persons and seem to be largely opportunists. Missing time. The missing time aspect is a fundamental key to understanding the methods used by these angelic beings. Earlier in the book, we detailed the characteristics of angels. They are interdimensional, immensely powerful and intelligent sentient beings, and often appear physically in our earthly dimensions. Genesis 19:1-29. If human beings can easily perform such deeds on their fellows, it cannot be any more difficult for angels to perform the same. Being able to appear instantly in a room would ensure anybody's attention, and once entities become the focus of the victim, most methods of hypnosis would become readily available. Experiencers usually only consciously remember the initial sighting of a UFO or an entity they believe to be alien. They then wake up several hours later with no conscious recollection of anything occurring during the missing time. However, when regressed, the victims are able to recount seeming events with incredible detail. Let's remember that all these entities have to do is to paint a picture to the entranced victim. Stories about cold metallic inspection tables, crude instruments, video screens, the works. UK Daily Mail reports trainee hypnotist puts himself in a trance for 5 hours. A circus performer stood locked in a trance for hours after he accidentally hypnotized himself while practicing his routine in a mirror. Sword swallower Hannibal Helmerto, 38, whose real name is Helmut Kitschmeyer, stood transfixed in front of the mirror for 5 hours until his wife Joanna found him. Unable to rouse him, she was forced to phone her husband's mentor, hypnotherapist Dr. Ray Roberts, who trained him on an intensive course recently. Dr. Roberts spoke to Helmut over the phone, and he slowly came out of the trance. Helmut said a person under hypnosis only responds to a voice of authority. Joanna, 22, said, "I was really shocked when I found him. He was just like a zombie staring at himself in the mirror. His pupils had gone really small, which is a sign of someone under hypnosis." Helmut, who has performed in the Circus of Horrors for 4 years, had recently learned how to put himself into a somnambulistic trance, a way of hypnotizing yourself, to enable him to swallow multiple swords in the infamous circus. The performer, who was originally from Germany but now lives in London, said, "I underestimated the techniques and how powerful they were. I put myself in a very deep state and lost all sense of time around me." He said he could not remember anything when he came out of the trance, other than getting up at 10 a.m. and starting to practice his hypnosis. He said he had no idea where the missing 5 hours had gone. "It's a very pleasant feeling. Sometimes it's so pleasant that you literally forget the things around you, and that is what happened to me," he said. "Your body is absolutely relaxed. You don't feel a thing. On the one hand, your body is relaxed and floating, and on the other hand, your mind is extremely focused on something." The self-taught hypnotist has been practicing the art for 9 years. He added, "I've always been interested in hypnosis because I had seen it on TV and thought it was a right big spoof. I started reading and learning about it, and it turns out it is not a big spoof at all. I got into it being a total disbeliever." To those who have experienced alien abduction scenarios, you may be thinking, "No, you are wrong. I know it happened. I felt it. I know it happened." Yes, you did feel it, but even when you genuinely feel something like a hard bench under you, a real one I mean, your perception is ultimately a sensation in the brain. So it's not hard to understand, as experts have pointed out and hypnotists have repeatedly demonstrated, that the imagination, the mind, can easily create the illusion of a physical sensation without the physical event actually happening. For example, the majority of people listening to this audio book will have experienced a falling dream while they've been asleep, and you can probably even now recall the physical sensation of falling through the air, yet it never actually happened. Once again, I am not saying that there are no physical aspects to these experiences. It is possible that people are being interfered with, being scratched, or the triangle marks are being imprinted upon the skin. But all this is being added to try to give weight to and enhance the overriding illusion of glorious spacemen benevolently overseeing the human race. After all, when appearances of angels are recorded in the Bible, they appear physical and can even kill humans. The Bible forbids going after or following, worshipping such beings because of the very fact that people can be deceived by them. They were described as the host of heaven, or starry host, 2 Kings 21 verse 3. People who claim out-of-body experiences and who claim to astral travel similarly record physical sensations of flying. In the same way, people can be hypnotized and told that a hot iron is being placed on their arm. The sensation they have is completely the same, i.e., just as real as if a real hot iron were there. The mind and body can even create a physical response in the area that thinks it was burned. In Derren Brown's TV show Trick or Treat, contestants stand the chance of winning a sizable prize, the treat, but it is at the risk of being on the receiving end of one of Brown's tricks. In one episode, Brown entered a family's home at night, the family was complicit in the ruse, and hypnotized a contestant while he was in his bed. The contestant's eyes can even be seen to be wide open. Triggers and anchoring techniques were used to stimulate responses that would be used in the future. These triggers and anchors are known as post-hypnotic reinduction cues, where a post-hypnotic suggestion will enable the person to re-enter a trance at the command of the hypnotist later on. This could also be the method used to account for ongoing abduction scenarios. The anchor could immediately take control of a person, regress someone back to the false memory, which could then be further embellished and exploited. The anchor could be as simple as a key word or even a snapping of the fingers, as often done by stage hypnotists. The contestant was told to visit a photo booth to take passport photos as part of his treat, an overseas holiday. When in the booth, lights flashed, music played, and key words were repeated that re-induced the unconscious state. While unconscious, the contestant was then removed and flown from England to a market in Marrakesh, Morocco, and placed back into the photo booth that had also been taken along. The time taken to do this was 14 hours. He was then awoken with more key words. Hidden cameras recorded the man's reaction. To him, 1 minute ago he was in a photo booth in England, and now he's in a completely different country place with no record of travelling there. His passport had even been stamped by the Moroccan Immigration Department. This was actually a form of abduction. Such real-life recorded events once again demonstrate the potential of hypnosis to explain practically every detail of the abduction phenomenon. The missing time aspect is the strongest clue that many of these experiences are being induced hypnotically. In addition, physical responses can be suppressed while under hypnosis. I've seen patients undergoing open abdominal surgery painlessly while under hypnosis, with no other form of anesthesia. This method was clinically used because of the patient's adverse reaction to anesthetic. I've seen stage performers hypnotize participants into thinking the large onions they were holding were in fact the juiciest apples they had ever tasted. With eyes wide open, the victims ate the onions, devouring them as if they could not get enough, and at the same time telling the rest of the studio audience how nice the apples were. No tears either. This could simply not be faked, and upon the word of the hypnotist, reality kicked in, and they then had the normal reactions one would expect devouring large quantities of raw onion. Eyes watering, spitting out the foul substance, including an impromptu vomit on stage. In the same show, anchors were used to put people into and out of a trance at will. It really happens. Please also understand that I am not saying that all abduction scenarios are explainable by this aforementioned hypothesis, but it does seek to explain, and it fits very well, what one might call the garden variety type experiences that are usually defined under the category of the classic abduction syndrome. Using the classic abduction scenario to predict experiences. Because of the patterns involved and the belief that this whole alien abduction scenario is a deception of cosmic proportions, when meeting experiences, one can even make predictions about the events before being actually told about them. This is because one can understand the agenda behind the deception and understand its purpose. As we've mentioned before, there are so many glaring inconsistencies about the view that benevolent ETs are stealthily abducting people in the middle of the night for their own good. Such a case where I was able to make and test a prediction was in New Zealand in 2006. After a lecture one evening, my hosts and I were leaving a venue when a car sped up to the entrance. I recognized the lady as having attended my earlier lecture. In the passenger seat was a man around 40+ years old. Getting out of the car, the lady said, "Here he is, go talk to him quickly." By now I knew what to expect. A person can become isolated by an experience that no one can understand, let alone believe that it actually occurred. Asking my hosts to move away so we could have some privacy, I invited the man to tell me what happened. At around 10 years of age, it was customary for his parents to visit relatives on their farm in the country. It was a young boy's paradise as he could play and explore the beautiful natural environment of the New Zealand countryside. He said that one day he saw a flying saucer land. Terrified, he ran away to the barn. He saw an occupant of the craft get out and walk towards the barn. The boy put his shoulder against the door, hoping the spaceman would think that it was closed. He says he can even remember pressure against the door. Petrified, he ran to the back of the barn to hide. He said the spaceman stood in the doorway with the daylight emanating from around him and piercing the darkness of the barn. He was about to describe the spaceman's appearance when I said, "No, please don't. May I ask you a few questions?" Working from the man's current age and his age at the time of the experience, I asked, was the spaceman wearing a one-piece silver or white jumpsuit with a glass-type helmet? He answered, "Yes. How could you know that?" It was a guess on my part, but a calculated one. I figured that his experience occurred in the late 1960s. This was the era of the B-grade science fiction movies and TV series such as Lost in Space, and this was the typology of the science fiction movies of the day. Valet was right. The phenomenon morphs according to the cultural environments of the day. Such a thing seems ridiculous by modern-day standards, but we need to remember that is what people would likely have accepted back then as representing a real spaceman. And as we noted ufologist John Keel saying earlier, many researchers go off the deep end because they cannot comprehend the seeming bizarreness of it all. This is ultimately because they do not recognize it as being spiritual in nature and how it can transmogrify in our own earthly realm. There is an answer, and we can help people. One would think then that because this is a spiritual deception being perpetrated by the enemies of God, this would be bread and butter for the church. The man that I just previously mentioned had become a Christian, but had never found an answer to what had happened to him. As he spoke to me, I could see how the event had confused and damaged him. Since I started researching this phenomenon, I have now met hundreds of individuals who have had UFO experiences of one kind or another. Many of them come to me because when they hear me speak on the subject, they have a sense that I understand what is really going on, and also because they've never heard anyone speak about it before, except perhaps to tell them that they really saw an alien spacecraft and were really abducted by aliens, or to make light of their experience totally. As I primarily do most of my speaking on the subject in churches, I take no pleasure in pointing out that the overwhelming majority of Christian leaders have no idea that significant numbers of people in their own congregations have seen something in the skies that they could not explain, or even worse, have had experiences with strange entities. The numbers, of course, are significantly higher for the general population, the very people that churches should be reaching. The reason that this grieves me so much is that the church should be regarded as the obvious place to go for people seeking answers to problems in their lives to find comfort and solace. Of course, I understand that it is easy to dismiss something that one does not understand, but individuals are being severely traumatized and damaged by their encounters with deceptive and dangerous spiritual forces. It is my own experience, and that of many other Christian ufologists, that churches and their leaders will often not even entertain a lecture, interview, or discussion on the matter. Simply, they want nothing to do with it. Often it is because they feel there are more important issues to deal with, day-to-day pressures in the church, for example. This is understandable, but if large numbers of the population believe in such things, and people are really hurting and are confused, then it actually presents significant opportunities for the church. Opportunities to provide answers, to help heal the broken and confused, remembering that the enemy seems to select the most vulnerable to start with, and to be more relevant to the culture than it has ever been. Even some non-Christian UFO researchers recognize the damage that follows experiences and have suggested that the church could help. But unless the church accepts, embraces, and learns to deal with this modern cultural phenomenon that is a subset of the issue of origins, where these beings come from and determining our own place in the universe, then even I, with great sadness, could not confidently recommend to experiencers that the church could help them with the issue. Because of this non-acceptance of the phenomenon occurring around them, the church does not know how to reach potentially millions of people, yes, that many, who are looking for answers. Unfortunately, most experiencers that I have met have felt angry because they were shunned by the church who would not take their experiences seriously or simply suggested that these people were demonically possessed. So this forces them to seek the assistance of those in the UFO community, who sadly will only reinforce the lie that they are being visited by highly evolved benevolent beings from another planet. A loving church that could embrace and explain this phenomenon will have people turning up at its door for answers.